There is a very high consumption rate of, adult use cannabis in France. And I think that's one of the stats that kind of goes around a lot. Well, France should be a huge market because there are so many million regular consumers. I think that we're around 10% of people who are saying they use it quite regularly of adults. So it's really quite a huge consumer base, yet nothing is legal in terms of rec. There's no real speak of recreational. I'll start with recreational. There's no real speak of this happening very soon. I think that the most optimistic people in the industry will say maybe within 3 or 4 years we'll begin speaking about it. It could happen earlier. We're never sheltered from a good surprise.
Free l'herbe. The prospect of broader cannabis legislation looks to be a certainty across Europe when you look at what's happening in Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands and a few other nations. But one major country that's strangely quiet on the topic is France. Joanna Weaver-Pelissier, co-founder and CEO of Cann, gives us an insider's view on all things CBD and THC.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton, the co-founder and what I call myself these days? I call myself a creative director. It sounds a bit grandiose, but we'll go with that, of Thermidor. And here is my other co-founder and the business brain behind the whole thing. It's Jamie Bonthron. Say hello, Jamie. How are you doing?
Good morning. That's a serious intro, and I'll have to live up to it now, which is worrying, but I am here officially.
You're here. That's it. Absolutely, man. It's turning up that counts, is what I keep telling myself. So, and today we have a very special guest. We have Joanna Weaver-Pelissier, who is the co-founder and CEO of Cann, based in France. So welcome to the show, Joanna. How are things with you? Whereabouts in France are you? You're not in Paris.
I'm not. I'm in the south of France, just north of Provence, between Ardèche and Drôme. So we live in a small place named Montélimar, which is famous for nougat.
Oh, very nice. But I'm guessing by your accent, you're not originally from France, although you may well be. Where are you from originally?
I'm not. I'm actually Canadian. I've lived in France for 14 years now. So, so I moved here in my late 20s.
Very good. And that's it. And so the whole legalization in Canada, that happened, after you left and things like that, where cannabis is concerned.
So when I was growing up in Canada, it was very, very normalized and it wasn't foreign to me at all. But I saw much more of it when I came to France. And then effectively about 8 years after I moved here, the legalization started really happening in Canada. So I visited a few times since, but I've noticed that the sky didn't fall. So it's quite an interesting viewpoint.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, living in France, we don't really hear much about France and cannabis from even within the sort of industry, a lot of the shows we've been to. And it's kind of like, well, what is the state? I mean, we hear about Germany, hear about Netherlands, we hear of Switzerland. And, one big country, we hear about Spain and Portugal, one big country we don't hear about in Europe. And any form of legalization is France. So what's the current situation regarding cannabis?
Exactly. It's very interesting that we don't hear so much about it because, of course, from internally we do, but there is a very high consumption rate of, adult use cannabis in France. And I think that's one of the stats that kind of goes around a lot. Well, France should be a huge market because there are so many million regular consumers. I think that we're around 10% of people who are saying they use it quite regularly of adults. So it's really quite a huge consumer base, yet nothing is legal in terms of rec. There's no real speak of recreational. I'll start with recreational. There's no real speak of this happening very soon. I think that the most optimistic people in the industry will say maybe within 3 or 4 years we'll begin speaking about it. It could happen earlier. We're never sheltered from a good surprise, but it is quite far away from being on the table because, for example, our Minister of the Interior a few years ago, but has the same position today, basically came out and said cannabis is la merde. So I think we all know what la merde means. It's shit. And it's actually quite funny because I heard one of the jargon words for cannabis in France is shit. So it's actually, that kind of gives you a perspective of how we're viewing this. And he said, everything that comes from the plant is terrible. Therefore, we're not going to think about legalizing it. We're not increasing the price of cigarettes to 10 euros in order to legalize cannabis. So there's a very, very big gap in the reality on the terrain and what the government will be putting forward these days. And it does not seem to be a lot of people will say on Macron's second mandate, maybe it will come through. I don't think it's the priority right now, and it doesn't seem to be getting it quite as much traction as in other countries, notably Germany, where we met. And so that's in terms of recreational, because that's quite the easiest one to do. It's not around the corner, and I can get into the reasons why I think that it will be quite delayed and why there are many, many roadblocks and speed bumps to that. But what's mainly happening in France now is the wellness CBD. So every country, I think, in Europe, it always seems to think that their legislation is the most tricky and it's so strange and everything. And so France, we have that same opinion here. But what's quite particular about France is that we've been for 4 years now, there have been CBD shops popping up all over the place. And the reason that CBD shops are able to exist is because they're allowed to sell flowers. So hemp flowers, always below 0.2, it might be 0.3 now, but we're still kind of sticking with 0.2. And flowers that are on the packaging, of course, you cannot smoke them, you can't burn them, you can't be under 18, everything that, basically they're decorative flowers. But those have been allowed in the shops. And as I understand it, in England and in many other countries, that it just hasn't even been a possibility. And in Italy it was, and it got kind of knocked down. I'm not sure if it's come back up. But in France, it's really this flowers, selling of the flowers. We are a big smoking country in terms of cigarettes. It's still quite rampant. So I think that kind of does follow suit. And in these shops, there are about 400 of them now. The flower sales do represent about 75-80% of their business, of their revenues. So what happened in the end of last year? So we've had 3 years of roller coasters. There were a lot of crackdowns on CBD shops a few years ago, and then they said, okay, we'll leave them alone a little bit. Let's crack down on them again. It was quite a roller coaster. But at the end of the year of last year, so at the end of 30th of December 2021, the government put out I should look this up, an arrêté. So it's basically a document. I figure out how to say it. A document that essentially prohibited this sale of flowers, but kind of from one day to the next, all these shops were thriving and they were getting much more traction, and whether rightfully or not. And so they said, we will not allow flowers anymore. This was on the 30th of December. So you can imagine these 400 CBD shop owners, their employees, all of their clients, because they're very...
Yeah, Happy New Year. Yeah, crikey.
Happy New Year, exactly. Let's see what happens next year. And then a month later, because I think there was quite a bit of lobbying on the behalf of the CBD shop owners and in the industry, we generally think that it is going backwards if we were to restrict flower use, but that is another question. They canceled this document. So they basically said, okay, we're going to put a hold on it. It's true, it will put a lot of people out of business. Maybe we didn't think about regulation properly before completely prohibiting it. So at the end of January, it was put on pause. So the shops were able to reopen and continue selling flowers again. But it's still very tentative, because between now and the end of the year, they should come up with a final decision. And we really don't know which way that will go. Because in these CBD shops, the front of the CBD shops is that we sell wellness products. We have cosmetics, we have oils. To be clear, oils are still novel food because we're part of Europe. It's a recommendation. It hasn't really been enforced so much, but we know that this is kind of this épée de Damoclès. This is looming over the industry that that the novel will be put into will be enforced. So the CBD shops are well open again, and I think this is one of the reasons that CBD is much more well known now in France, because about 4 years ago, and this is where the stigma comes in and rears its ugly head over and over, as soon as you said CBD and they say, people would say, this is from cannabis, it's evidently wrong. Our interior minister told us it's everything comes from cannabis is wrong. So I think that the opinions are changing a little bit in that we have a lot of clients going to these CBD shops, but it is worthwhile mentioning that because there's no regulation, or there's very little clear regulation for years, there are CBD shops that have sprouted and that have really done things in a very classy manner, with very pure, very, very wellness focused, lots of plants, just very much, and even catering to that might be aging.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I think that is not to be underestimated as a way to get people engaged with the plant, that whole, the whole wellness angle. I mean, here in the UK, again, CBD is quite prevalent in kind of, like you go to like a local pharmacy and you'll see like CBD patches for like pain relief, or, so it's you can buy different supplements and products. And it seems to be, now I speak to people and oh, CBD, that's the okay bit of cannabis. And that's the kind of perception now, or the bit that doesn't get you high. So that means whether that's right or wrong is another debate, as we all know. But again, it's more prevalent in that way. I don't think I've ever seen a CBD shop per se. I mean, I've seen in the UK. Have you, Jamie? No, we do live in quite small towns.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably it. No, I don't think so. They're not quite as prevalent as vape shops, are they?
No, that's the thing.
It's not at that scale. But
yes, we have fewer vape. I mean, we still have vape shops, but we seem to have fewer vape shops than, at least that are visible, than the CBD shops. And effectively, it is quite strange. They're not all called CBD shops. It's often around the word hemp, around the word canna. But that, sorry, what was I going to say? It is quite strange to create a shop based on one molecule, and that's why I think that the shops that are going a bit more wellness are talking about hemp. You have hemp textiles, you have hemp, bath salts, you have things that are not on the kind of recreational, typical smokers.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I think we spoke to someone the other day. And it's like, well, why would you focus on that one cannabinoid or something like that as a thing? And I guess, THC and CBD are the best known, I suppose. And so I guess it's probably just more of a marketing ploy than anything else, that people understand what CBD doesn't mean central business district anymore. It's as it did when I was at, GCSE geography. That's another story. But no, it's true.
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess too as well.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, again, the wellness thing and, the benefits of other cannabinoids and different terpenes and things like that, people are starting to sort of see that. Do you see that in France as well? Are people a bit more conscious, if this got this sort of terpene profile, then I'm more interested in its benefits? Is that the sort of thing that's sort of happening as well through the sort of CBD shops?
There's a part of the market that's quite that is as mature as is what you say. I think that the problem with something like, and I do agree that CBD is much more sexy than cannabinoids. Cannabinoids sound very medical, and of course that's what we're trying to veer away from. But I think that there is a part of the market that is looking into terpene blends, that is looking into other cannabinoids. At the same time, the shops that I didn't mention earlier are the shops that were really much more focused, and the image of the shops was much more, come smoke, it's almost cannabis. There's the posters of Bob Marley, fine. Posters of Pablo Escobar, less fine, on the wall. So I think that there's quite a bit of the market that is that kind of clientele, which is perhaps less interested in the wellness effects and just looking for the maximum THC that they can have in the product, which is 0.2, but still try. And I think that it will come, but the problem with CBD is that it comes along with other keywords and kind of jazzy words like terpenes, and they say, oh, now we have terpenes, we're just going to sell terpenes. And where this is where I come in, because I'm on this kind of security of product side, and notably in cosmetics. But terpenes are very, very dangerous. They have to be handled with care. They have their essential oils. Basically, they can be very toxic if not used in the right way. So I think that as a whole, the community, the cannabis community, and I'm not just talking in France, should maybe veer away from kind of saying, okay, the next thing is terpenes, the next thing is HHC. Because in France, of course, there were the more opportunistic, perhaps, shops and distributors. So as soon as HHC came on the table as not really on the table, but in our ears, and it's the new cannabinoid. It's also a bit psychoactive, but we don't know yet. And
it's not technically illegal. Yeah, it's
not technically illegal. Yeah, exactly. Depending on the product type, of course. But then, so you did get all these mailings coming in saying, we now have HHC, and that's kind of bothersome to me, because we do need to do this properly. But I think that it's really a divided. I wouldn't say that we can categorize CBD shops and actors into the two, serious and not serious, but there is quite a bit of overlap as well. So whether we have, there's a very good case for France and terpenes, of course, because we have a lot of aromatic plants. We're very famous, in my region for lavender. A lot of essential oils come from Grasse. Just down south, there's the perfume industry. So it makes sense that we'd be interested in those. But my co-founder, who has the cosmetics lab, who is a toxicologist and a veterinarian by trade, the first time I mentioned terpenes, he said, okay, we don't play around with terpenes. And I was seeing all these terpenes at shows and everything like this, saying, well, why don't we play around with terpenes? So I had a lot to learn, but I think it's also very important that the community, as we grow, and if we want to become more serious, that we don't just start, putting rather on the other random cannabinoids in, and so the fact that it's CBD only, I don't think we'll have CBG shops coming up. I don't think we'll have technically THC shops for quite a while.
Yeah, but what's the sort of status of medical or medicinal cannabis in France? Is that, I think there's a trial, or there was a trial or something, or no? Please explain. Yeah,
there is and was, and there might be another. There was a trial. So in the end of 2019, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps even 2018, the government announced that they would be starting a trial period for 2 years to test not the efficacy of medical cannabis, but the feasibility of a medical cannabis supply chain. So they put that into place. It took quite a long time. There was the COVID came in, and it took about 2 years to put into place. So beginning of March 2021, the idea is that up to 3,000 patients could be prescribed cannabis for a period of 2 years, and we'd see how the whole thing worked out. That was a very interesting beginning of experiment because, of course, no French actors and very few European actors were positioned to supply medical cannabis to France. So France came up with a brilliant idea to say, well, we'll get it for free from these producers who must be foreign, who must pair up with a distributor in France to get these products out into the market. And we'll see how that works. So there were a lot of, call for tenders. There was there were a few months given for different partners. So a French partner with a foreign exporter to get on the market, and about 5 were chosen to supply oils and flowers. A lot of the flower does come from Canada. Some of the oils are from, I believe, Cann, but also Australia. I mean, there are quite a few actors involved, and this is to continue for 2 years. A lot of people were thinking, a lot of the public would think this is to make sure that medical cannabis is going to work. Of course, that's not at all the reason for this experimentation period. It's really to study the feasibility. Now, coming to the end of this 2-year period, it will be next March. Right now, there are not nearly 3,000 people taking medical cannabis. Prescriptions have been a lot lower, a lot fewer. And I think that it is because also of the stigma, because many practitioners were not willing to participate. Those who were often had reticence, saw reticence from the side of their patients saying, I'm really not ready to try this. And of course, you have to give up your driver's license for 2 years. So that is quite limitative.
Really? Wow.
Yes, quite limiting. I'm not sure how that works in other countries, but so when we're coming up
here, doesn't like that here. But
so it just.
Yeah, I suppose that's a whole other debate, isn't it? It's like, because it's kind of like, well, there's no kind of like, alcohol test, you're either under the influence or you're not. It's like cannabis is in your system for 6 months. You might be absolutely fine. You might be away with the fairies or whatever it is. It's the same test. There's no way to kind of, am I competent enough and sound of mind to be able to operate a machine? Well, that's debatable and sober, to be honest, in my case. But it's a weird one. It's a weird one for sure.
It is a really weird one. And I think that is probably what deterred quite a few people from taking it. And that's just kind of France's stance of saying, it's very dangerous. We're just not going to mess around with that. So what they're starting to say now, and I haven't read too much into it, but it's just a very recent piece of news, is that they might do extend the experimentation period to include local actors, so a local supply chain, because the idea of France, and I think this is quite a universal decision on the part of governments, is that they do want to have a French sector, French supply chain, but it wasn't able to be put into place at all due to the fact that we cannot cultivate, we can't have authorizations to touch THC or to extract. So I think that might be a wise decision now. It could have potentially been taken a few years ago as well, saying we are looking for a French sector, so let's see if we can make that work and get that started.
That sort of thing, everything being French. I mean, it's a bit. I mean, having been there and visited, like everything is kind of like, there's a kind of real pride in it being French produced, or and you get that whether you're like in the supermarket buying apples or whether you're buying like a Coca-Cola, it's sort of like bottled in France or whatever, and it's like. Well, there's definitely a sense of pride around that, and the provenance of, So I can imagine cannabis. It's like, well, we want it to have that sense of, the same sort of cachet or pride in what we're doing. Yeah, absolutely.
And even the idea, I think, since COVID as well as kind of medical sovereignty. Not to be reliant on other countries when we might have issues like this that affect the whole universe. But pride is a very good word. It's a very nice word. I think that it is very much present in France, and I see it, of course, in cosmetics. So made in France cosmetics, it's one of our key selling points. And what we do hope, and because France, a few of the things we're strong in, of course, wine and perfume. So that kind of cultivation of very precious plants, that makes sense. But also research and development is quite strong in France. What everyone in France is hoping, at least us in the sector, and I'm assuming the public as well, were they apprised of all of this news, is that we tend to be late to the game, France, whether it's regulations on building, which is my old industry, or ecological building, or almost anything that comes along. We won't necessarily be the first. We tend to think, let's do it really properly. So it's taking a long time to figure out what will be the rules for medical cannabis, what will be the rules, for CBD shops and all this. But what we do, my true deep hope is that we're going to do it well, and we're actually going to learn from the errors that have been committed elsewhere, which is normal. They were pioneers, and we have to learn from them. But what the positive sign for me is that the ANSMs, that's kind of our MOH, so it's called Ministry of Health, right, and Security of Medications in France, has been auditioning groups who are wishing to become players, actors in this industry, in the medical cannabis space, whether it's groups, from cultivation to distribution, or if it's just for cultivation authorizations. And often these groups are, either have been in the industry for a while, have explored what's happening across the globe, or have partners who are already active. And they are auditioning them, not auditing in terms of getting an authorization. Auditioning, saying, what do you think we should do for this part? Should we only look at THC, CBD, or should we look at, trying to titrate a bunch of different cannabinoids? Things like that are really quite relatively impressive, because often when you have a legislation coming in about medical cannabis, they'll just say, okay, these are the four afflictions that it can be prescribed for, last resort, and everything like that. So a lot of the actors in France are really pushing for them to have a much more of a...
It sounds like they're really listening to the science aspect of it. And I think that's, seems critical. And that seems like, it seems like the sensible approach. But again, I always think I was speaking to someone in the US, and it's like, well, there's like, we've got so many problems in Colorado or California. It's like, well, at least you're doing it. That's the thing. And figuring it out as you go, rather than just kind of talking about it. You know what I mean? And I think, in varying degrees, different countries are sort of trying to do it. And, and it sounds like, France is in some similar situation in terms of, driving awareness or just kind of public opinion as we are here. I mean, we have a similar situation in that, everything has to be imported. We can grow it here if you've got a home office license, but you can't be used here per se, which is really, really random. So again, it makes sense to have kind of domestic cultivation and be able to use the products that you have, just for the sake of convenience, let alone, the quality of the product. But again,
Yes. And even carbon footprint. I really believe strongly that this industry is new and that we should be doing things properly. So whether I'm talking about cosmetics being clean and not having, petrochemical ingredients in them, or, women and inclusion and minorities and women in business.
I think you're right. It's like, the whole industry has an opportunity to create the change that other industries haven't seen. And I think there's a lot of watching and waiting, again, everyone's waiting. Oh, what will Germany do? They'll probably do it properly. They'll do it rigorously. There'll be lots of discussion and, lots of back and forth. And, maybe that is what's important to getting this right, but again, I think there always comes a time for less talk, more action, doesn't there? And it's like, well, when do you call it?
Yes, we definitely like to talk quite a lot in France. We like to talk and re-talk and think things over and do the thesis and antithesis. It's very much that kind of culture. I do think when you mentioned Germany, I think that France will be looking to Germany and seeing what they're, without, we wouldn't admit it, but seeing what happens and how they regulate. Because when we look at Canada or the States, in France at least, there's a kind of a notion of, well, they're kind of crazy over there. They kind of do it and then they figure it out later. And we can't do it. The Americans do, because it's very, if we say in French, à l'américaine, it kind of means just like a freestyle or big, or, go big or go home, or too big to fail, all these kind of things. And that doesn't seem very right for France. So I think that is it. Also, we're looking for an example that with whom we identify more better, actually, in Germany.
Do you think there's a way to grow well, I'm sure there are ways to grow awareness. What do you think are the ways that awareness of cannabis as a plant and the benefits of it can kind of be grown? Because obviously the CBD shops, the ones that did it well were great, and the ones that didn't and were kind of bohemian and probably a lot of the time maybe a grey market. Would that
Yes.
say, you know, that probably didn't do a lot of good for the sort of wider cause? And when you've got maybe a more conservative population who aren't particularly keen on it, who are deciding who the government are, who your minister of health is and things like that, you know, it's
Yes.
all informal up the chain. What do you think the things that either businesses or people can do to kind of raise awareness and bring it more into a conversation, as opposed to it being this kind of like, you know, kind of like a thing in the corner where it's like there's some shops and they're a bit dodgy, and
Exactly. And even just to comment on that, when we have CBD expos in France, and there's, I'm not saying anything negative about this expo, which is actually very well done, but what you see when you go to these expos is not a good representation, in my view, of what cannabis can be. So there's, there are of course players from everywhere coming and selling their best, newest stuff that's wrapped in cellophane and things like this that you just don't really want to see. So I think that is a part of it that we need to change the image. So what I'd like to see happen, and back in 2019, there was probably the second or third Cannabis Europa was in Paris, and everyone was like, how is this possible in Paris? It was even at the Maison de la Chimie, which is really a very important building right near the another really important building in Paris. Anyway, it's right in the district, the government district, and it seemed to really kind of bring at least comfort people who wanted to get into the industry, but in a very serious way, whether it's from the pharma industry or from the cosmetic side or from the the raw materials or cultivation. It seemed to bring a lot of people together that and we could kind of feel this common goal, this overarching thing, saying let's create a new industry the right way. There hasn't really been anything since in that sense, and I think that what we probably need, and of course there was COVID and everything that came in, so we haven't had many events, but I do think that more media, more events, but really well curated, in the sense that we see a lot of the CBD brands. We see a lot of there are also quite a few actors in CBD who are saying, let's also do psychedelics. So it's a bit hard to kind of focus on the real question at hand. One thing I think that there should be more events, and I'm really trying to work on that, getting event focused around medical and eventually wellness without going into to the dark side of wellness. But the other thing is we have to look at the arguments that are being put forward for, against. Already there are public authority figures who are saying that this stuff is crap, so that doesn't help. But there's also we also need to, one of the historical arguments in France is that the whole black market, which is not only weed, but a good part, is managed by these low-income housing projects that often are very, it's not a very multicultural place there. It may be multicultural, but it's very much a segregated area, I would say. And these are called cités, and this is where even on some of them, even the police don't enter into that zone, because it's kind of a no-touch place. And one of the arguments is, what will we do? If there's recreational use, and we don't want to go for recreational use, because what will we do with this black market and all the people who are happily working in the black market? And that really irks me, of course, because that to me is not an end argument. You can't say, well, it's the illegal market's working pretty well. What can we just leave it as is? But that is one of the things that does tend to, when I ask people what they think, and this is one of my favorite pastimes, is, a hairdresser, anyone on the airplane, just ask them, what do you think about cannabis? And they say, oh, you're from Canada, you must be for it. I just want to know. And often it is, well, it's really dangerous for young people. So of course that's absolutely handleable. We can set an age. But often there's the gateway drug arguments.
Yeah.
Is finally being kind of squashed, even in French. I think that someone translated a recent article where they absolutely proved that this is not a gateway drug. I think we've all known that for years. That is one of the arguments, and the other argument is this black market argument. The other potential argument is that we don't want more people smoking, but we know very well that those who are in the industry, and we see all of the different ways you can consume cannabis. The idea is to, if it were to be democratized, we would have many, many more ways than not smoking. So all of these arguments, I think, can be squashed. But the one about what will we do with the black market, to me, is quite quite fortunate.
It's an interesting one because, again, people are just like, well, surely we just want to eradicate, the black market and, take control of it. But to sort of build that in as a consideration seems like was an interesting debate for sure.
It is. And often even the kind of second argument I get, and I say, well, the black market, unfortunately, it still will exist, that's just does happen. And we have to make sure, hopefully we can regulate eventually in future in a way that will enable the black market to either.
But that's where the expertise is, isn't it? The sort of legacy black market, is where, and it's kind of like, I guess you look to the US, you look at the kind of social equity sort of projects and giving people who have the experience, or have committed crimes in the past and things like, giving them a platform to actually legitimize what they're doing.
Yes.
And do you think something like that would work well in France?
I think it would work well. I don't know if it would ever be implemented, but I think it would work very well. And I hope that that's another kind of lesson we could draw in from, again, we have this richness, this wealth of experience from abroad. And effectively, I looked at all of the rec markets that are opening up in the States and what they're choosing to do. And I think we do need to analyze that and look at what we can do with it. It's the social country, France. So, at the foundation. So it there should be something like that put into place. But again, we need people who are knowledgeable about. A lot of people who were working and who want to work in cannabis do leave France. Who are actually knowledgeable in it, or who want, because it's just, if you were there from 2018 to 2020, you just thought to yourself, it's not possible.
So what led you to be involved in the sector? What was, again, you said you used to work in the construction industry.
Yes, when I first moved to France, I worked with my husband. Who was French. We had a construction company, eco construction company, for 10 years. So nothing to do, obviously, with cannabis. I wasn't from construction either. So I think we could qualify ourselves as serial entrepreneurs. But we've always appreciated the plant. Know much less about it than we do now. But of course, it was also part of my youth in Canada. I didn't actually consume very much, but I smelled it all the time. And it was just you heard a lot about it. And my husband, who was from the finance background, had been seeing what was happening on the stock markets basically about 4 or 5 years ago in the States, and saying, oh, there's something's going on here. What can we do? So we started, questioning what could we do in France. We thought originally we would get into testing because we thought, okay, France is going to be very rigorous and we'll need testing labs. Of course, that's a very, very tricky place to be. Even today, it's very hard. A testing lab who has access to the right tools, and we ended up co-founding the company with 3 other people, and one of them is an expert in cosmetics, and we realized that and this is still true today, one of the only product segments or product types categories that can have CBD fully legally within a regulation that exists already is cosmetics. And when the first few years, it was very little interest in cosmetics. There's very much the idea that cosmetics with CBD don't work because what was put on the shelves was just cosmetics where they sprinkled in some CBD, and it was very, very messy. But the more and more, as the years go by, and the regulation on different kind of products has been just evolving so quickly and unpredictably, we see a lot of brands turning to cosmetics, saying this will be one of the best, the highest, most quickly growing segments will be cosmetics. So we really got into that, and I learned cosmetics and CBD at the same time. I really discovered both at the same time. So what I find interesting, I'm the CEO of Cann, but we have a bunch of different activities that I think would take another episode to get into. But what I really enjoy about my work is that I think that we're participating in the kind of creating a serious business around CBD and creating a serious image about the CBD. In cosmetics, it's been allowed CBD and CBG for about 1.5 years now. Before that, it was allowed in synthetics. So we've formulated for quite a while and figured that it is quite an interesting market, but especially for the US or Canada. Sorry, I'm headed actually to New York tomorrow to speak next week at a conference about how to get into the European market with cosmetics, because it might not be the most fascinating subject for anyone else, but the regulation in Europe to get a cosmetic product formulated on the market is about 12, 18 months, and it's very tedious. You test everything, everything, the packaging, compatibility, everything. In the States, you can basically put a product on the market and right away, as soon as you formulated it in whatever packaging, and then you have to kind of, over the years, mount your dossier of information. So that's what pleases me is that I have this this role to kind of educate people from the CBD industry who tend to think that, CBD is borderline, so it must be borderline in cosmetics as well. And also educate those in the cosmetics industry who are interested in CBD but think, is my Instagram account going to be shut down if I put CBD in my cosmetic products? Kind of where I fall. And just briefly, the rest of Cann, we have some pet products for household animals. And we also have a foot in the medical, which is why I was speaking about the medical. We have a group called Cann, and we're also applying for an authorization to become part of this, whether it's the next experimentation period or whether it is the actual legislation that will be coming to allow for medical cannabis to be actually distributed in France.
Very cool. Very cool. It sounds like again, there's so many different ways into cannabis. And I would again ask the question, France is known, for its gastronomy. Do you think edibles could be a viable market for France, or do you think there's too much stigma around cannabis as it is to kind of think about, don't touch our gastronomy type thing? What do you think? I mean, I find that an interesting one because again, it would kind of follow, but
I think it probably will. Now, are we talking THC edibles or CBD edibles? Because
I don't know, both maybe. I mean, what's the kind of appetite for it, so to speak?
I think it could be very promising because, and to give you an example, because we come from the town of Nougat and we're right near a very, very important chocolate manufacturer. We tried at the beginning to say, do you want to just try putting some CBD or some full spectrum in these products? And they were very much reticent. But so I think for industry, it'll be quite a long time. But in Paris, I have quite a few industry friends who say, well, we've just created a partnership with a patisserie or a bake shop. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The bake shop where they're putting into their profiterole or into their chocolate eclairs, they're putting in CBD and it's selling like hotcakes. And then we also are working with a butcher who has agreed to do, you may have seen this hamburger patties with CBD or full spectrum in them that are sold on the market. Macaron or little French pastries, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see that actually, if you're walking through Paris, not nearly as much as CBD shops. There is about one on every corner, but from time to time, or even a restaurant saying we have a special CBD menu. I think that it remains small because, of course, we're still under novel foods. So anyone that's going to be commercializing something in a more industrial scale or larger scale will be reticent. But I do think it would be, we like to eat here, that's for sure. There was also the idea of having CBD in wine and in champagne, that a few products tried to launch as well, because we think, why not, associate the pleasures. But it's definitely possible. I think that we will be deviating from the smoking route eventually and need these different kinds of, but it's a very good question. I hope so.
Yeah, it would seem to be a natural fit, but then it might be so kind of entrenched in kind of, culture that, we don't, there's some things you just don't mess with. And I know in France, there's the purity, the tradition, the way of doing things, particularly around food is very like,
it's a very old country.
Don't do it. And there's a good reason for that, because it's always usually delicious. You know what I mean? So you think,
I do.
Can we do like a gastronomy menu kind of? And you hear about other countries doing it, and like in Canada and US, and like doing these sort of THC sort of taster menus and things like that. And
yes, I don't see why not. I think that would be an interesting idea. But what I do think that it could be very interesting for France, and that would really help us to get to that point, is if we start having, in wine, we have these AOC or AOP, appellation origin, controlled origin.
Like champagne can only come from that region.
Absolutely.
That sort of thing,
Champagne, that's for sure. We cannot add anything to champagne, still call it champagne. But even like Chablis, or you'll have Bourgogne, near here, there's Châteauneuf-du-Pape. If we could have those appellations for cannabis, because of course a lot of it is to do with the terroir. It's the land, the climate, everything specific about each area. So I think if we can, that would be something I would definitely see happening in France. We need to be much more open-minded to begin with, because we're not quite there yet as a population. But if we could say, listen, we're going to make boutique cannabis in France. We're going to have, right next to the valleys where this famous wine is grown, we also have a little cannabis, plantation. We'll have this, and it could be known worldwide. And I think that could be very, very interesting, because I do think that although Canada has it's very much associated in people's minds with cannabis and with being a pioneer, I think if in the future, if you have kind of a Canadian cannabis, it will be for a certain type of clientele, and you have a French boutique cannabis, it will probably be for another type of clientele, maybe with caviar or things like that. That would suit. I think that would help the acceptance of it, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking cannabis, champagne, and caviar. It's a heady mix, right? But why not? Could be really, really cool. No, but thank you, Joanna. That's some really good stuff. And just to round things out, I mean, what's kind of next for you? You say you're off to New York to give it. Is that the Business of Cannabis conference? Is that the one, or which one are you off to?
No, I like that one too. It's a white label expo, World Expo CBD white label. There's a bit of everything, but it's at the Javits Center, so it's actually absolutely huge. I'm speaking on Theater 6 or something like this, so it's a big one. And then I'm going to try to kind of stick around Europe for a bit and do a lot of those conferences. I've been doing attending conferences since like late 2018. The first conference I went to was in London, and it was cannabis. It was Cannatech, and there were about 100 people there. And I've just loved this scene and seeing how it's evolving and meeting all the different actors and seeing what's happening in different countries. So I do hope to kind of continue that. But one of our main markets is the US. It's more a mature market.
Yes.
Products on the shelves, and there's a lot to do there. So crossing the Atlantic a few times.
Brilliant stuff. Well, best of luck with it, and thanks for taking the time to chat to us today. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Hopefully, and are you going to be at MJ BizCon
in Vegas? I wish. No, I will not be this year.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to be at most of those in Europe until next spring, and then go back.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll see you again. But no, thank you very much, and appreciate you taking the time. And good luck.
Thanks. We're lovely talking to you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Joanna.